The fluorescent lights of Los Angeles International Airport buzzed overhead as thousands of travelers rushed through Terminal B, dragging suitcases and clutching boarding passes. Among them, a woman in her late 40s moved slowly, almost hesitantly, through the crowd. Her name was Maggie Walsh, though most people called her Maggie. She wore a faded blue cardigan over a simple floral dress, clothes that had seen better days, but were clean and carefully pressed. Her canvas shoes squeaked slightly against the polished floor, and she carried a small, worn duffel bag that contained everything she owned worth taking on this journey. Maggie's hands trembled slightly as she approached Gate 47. The boarding pass felt heavy in her palm, though it weighed nothing at all. Flight 2847 to New York City, a journey that represented both an ending and a desperate hope for a beginning. She found a seat in the waiting area, tucking herself into the corner, trying to make herself small and invisible, as she'd learned to do over the past 2 years. Across the terminal, in the exclusive lounge reserved for first-class passengers, Khalid Al-Rashid stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching planes take off into the golden California sunset. At 38 years old, Khalid cut an imposing figure. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and his black hair was swept back with the kind of precision that came from having a personal stylist. His dark eyes were sharp, calculating, always assessing. In his hand, he held a phone that hadn't stopped buzzing for the past hour. He silenced another call without looking at who it was. His assistant, Marcus, hovered nearby, tablet in hand, ready to address whatever his boss might need. Khalid had built his empire from the ground up, turning his family's modest trading business in Dubai into a global conglomerate worth billions. Hotels, real estate, technology investments. The Al-Rashid name was synonymous with success, luxury, and an almost ruthless efficiency in business. But success had its price. Khalid couldn't remember the last time he'd had a conversation that wasn't about profit margins, acquisitions, or stock prices. He couldn't recall the last time someone had spoken to him as just a person, not as a wallet or an opportunity. The announcement crackled through the speakers. Flight 2847 to New York City now boarding all passengers. Maggie stood, her legs feeling weak beneath her. She joined the line, watching as first-class passengers were called first. She'd never flown first class. She'd barely flown at all. This ticket had been a gift, a final kindness from her former employer, who'd felt guilty about letting her go after 23 years of service as a housekeeper. Khalid strode toward the gate, Marcus trailing behind with a leather briefcase and a garment bag. They bypassed the regular boarding line entirely, and within moments Khalid was settling into seat 2A, the spacious first-class cabin already feeling too confining. He pulled out his laptop immediately, diving back into the world of spreadsheets and acquisition proposals. The flight attendant, a polished woman named Rachel with a practiced smile, approached. "Mr. Al-Rashid, welcome aboard. Can I get you anything before we take off? Champagne? Sparkling water?" "Water. Still, no ice," Khalid replied, without looking up from his screen. As the boarding process continued, Maggie made her way down the aisle, her eyes scanning the seat numbers. 2B. She was in first class. The shock of it hadn't worn off, even though she'd known for weeks. Her former employer, Mrs. Catherine Hendricks, had upgraded her ticket as a parting gift. Maggie approached row 2 and stopped, her heart sinking slightly when she saw the man in 2A. He radiated wealth and power, the kind of person who would probably be annoyed at having to sit next to someone like her. She hesitated, then quietly began to stow her small bag in the overhead compartment. Khalid glanced up, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. The woman struggling with the overhead bin didn't fit the usual first-class demographic. He noticed her worn clothing, the way her hands shook slightly, the careful, almost apologetic way she moved. His first instinct was irritation. He'd hoped for an empty seat beside him, space to spread out his work, but something stopped him from looking away immediately. Perhaps it was the dignity in the way she carried herself despite her obvious circumstances, or maybe it was the exhaustion in her eyes that somehow felt familiar. "Let me help," he heard himself say, standing and easily lifting her bag into the compartment. Maggie looked at him, startled. "Oh, thank you. That's very kind." Her voice was soft, with a slight southern accent that suggested roots far from California. She settled into seat 2B, careful not to take up too much space, as if she was afraid of imposing on his territory. Khalid returned to his laptop, but found his concentration wavering. The woman beside him sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. She didn't pull out a phone, didn't reach for a magazine. She just sat, lost in thoughts that seemed to weigh heavily on her shoulders. "Before we continue with this incredible journey, I want to ask you, Where are you watching this from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. I love connecting with viewers from all around the world. And if you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We share powerful, life-changing stories every week, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Trust me, this story has a twist you won't see coming. The plane pushed back from the gate, and the familiar safety demonstration began. Maggie watched intently, though Khalid ignored it entirely, having heard it thousands of times. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, Maggie's breathing became slightly faster. Her hands gripped the armrests, Khalid noticed. "First time flying?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. Maggie turned to him, embarrassed. "Is it that obvious? I've flown twice before, but it's been many years. I'm not afraid exactly, just unfamiliar." The engines roared to life, and the plane began its acceleration down the runway. Maggie closed her eyes, her knuckles white on the armrest. Without thinking, Khalid's hand moved slightly closer to hers, a small gesture of reassurance, though he didn't actually touch her. "The worst part is the takeoff," he said quietly. "Once we're in the air, it's smooth, like floating." Maggie opened her eyes and looked at him, a small, grateful smile crossing her face. "Thank you. That's kind of you to say." The plane lifted off, and true to Khalid's word, within minutes they were cruising smoothly at altitude. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and the cabin began to relax. Rachel appeared with their pre-flight beverages. "Water for you, Mr. Al-Rashid. And for you, ma'am?" "Just water as well, please," Maggie said softly. "Thank you so much." Khalid should have returned to his work. He had emails piling up, a conference call scheduled to happen via the plane's Wi-Fi in 30 minutes, and a merger proposal that needed his review before landing. But instead, he found himself curious about this woman who seemed so out of place, yet somehow so present. "Are you visiting New York or is it home?" he asked, closing his laptop slightly. Maggie turned to him, surprised that he was continuing the conversation. In her experience, wealthy people didn't make small talk with people like her unless they wanted something. "Neither, really," she replied carefully. "I'm going to stay with my sister in Brooklyn. For a while, maybe permanently." There was a story there. Khalid could hear it in the pause, in the word maybe, in the way her eyes flickered with something between hope and resignation. "And you?" Maggie asked, feeling it was polite to return the question. "Do you live in New York?" "I have an apartment there," Khalid said. "I have apartments in many cities. I travel constantly for business." "That must be exciting," Maggie offered, seeing the world. Khalid considered this. "Exciting isn't the word I'd use. Airports and hotels and boardrooms all look the same after a while. Different languages, same conversations." There was a weariness in his voice that surprised even him. He never spoke like this, never showed vulnerability, or admitted to anything less than complete satisfaction with his life. Maggie studied him for a moment. She'd spent 23 years working in wealthy homes, and she'd developed an ability to see beyond the surface. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was always slightly clenched, the exhaustion behind the sharp intelligence in his eyes. "That sounds lonely," she said simply. Khalid felt something shift in his chest. When was the last time someone had seen him, really seen him, not just his bank account or his business reputation? "I suppose it is," he admitted. "But loneliness is a luxury problem, isn't it? There are far worse things than being lonely in a penthouse." Maggie's expression changed slightly, and Khalid immediately regretted his words. They'd sounded more callous than he'd intended. "I didn't mean," he started, but Maggie gently interrupted. "No, you're right. There are worse things. Being lonely in a penthouse is different from being lonely in a shelter." The word shelter hung in the air between them. Khalid felt his assumptions reassembling themselves. "Is that where you've been?" he asked carefully. "A shelter?" Maggie hesitated, then nodded. "For the past 2 years, after I lost my job and my apartment. I tried to find work, but at my age, without recent references, it was impossible. I'd been a housekeeper for the same family for 23 years. When Mrs. Hendricks passed away, her children sold the house and let the staff go. They gave me 3 months severance. It ran out faster than I expected." She spoke without self-pity, just stating facts, which somehow made it more affecting. Khalid found himself setting his laptop aside completely. "How did you end up with a first-class ticket?" A genuine smile crossed Maggie's face, the first real one Khalid had seen. "Mrs. Hendricks's daughter, Catherine Jr., found out about my situation a few weeks ago. She was horrified. She said she'd had no idea, that she'd assumed I'd found other work. She bought me this ticket to New York, where my sister lives. My sister has a spare room and says I can stay as long as I need. She works at a hospital, and she thinks she can help me find a position there, maybe in housekeeping or the cafeteria." "That's good," Khalid said. "That she's helping you. It's more than good. It's everything." Maggie replied. You know what the hardest part of the shelter was? Not the uncomfortable beds, or the limited privacy, or even the fear. It was the invisibility. People look right through you when they realize you're homeless. You become less than human in their eyes, a problem to be avoided, not a person with a story. Her words hit Khalid like a physical blow. How many times had he looked right through service staff, homeless people on the street, anyone who didn't have relevance to his immediate goals? How many Maggies had he passed without seeing? I'm sorry, he said, and he meant it. I'm sorry that happened to you, and I'm sorry that people made you feel invisible. Maggie looked at him with surprise. You're apologizing? You didn't do anything. Maybe that's exactly why I'm apologizing, Khalid said quietly. Rachel interrupted with the dinner service, presenting elaborate first-class meals with multiple courses. Khalid ordered without thinking, his usual choice. Maggie studied the menu like it was written in a foreign language, overwhelmed by the options. The chicken is excellent, Khalid offered, and I'd recommend the chocolate torte for dessert. I'll trust your expertise, Maggie said with a small laugh. This is all a bit overwhelming for me. As they ate, they continued talking. Khalid found himself sharing things he never discussed with anyone. He told her about his father, who had died when Khalid was 22, leaving him a struggling business and enormous expectations. He talked about the pressure of being the eldest son, of carrying a family legacy, of the constant drive to prove himself worthy. I haven't taken a real vacation in 8 years, he admitted. I work 16-hour days, 7 days a week. I tell myself it's worth it, that I'm building something important. But sometimes I wonder what I'm building it for. I have no wife, no children. My siblings have their own lives. My mother barely speaks to me because I chose to stay in business rather than pursue the political career she wanted for me. Maggie listened without judgment, without trying to fix anything. Just present and attentive in a way that felt rare and precious. Can I tell you something? Maggie said after a moment. Something I learned in the shelter? Please, Khalid said. I learned that rock bottom has a way of showing you what really matters. When you lose everything, the masks come off. You can't pretend anymore. You're just you, stripped down to your essentials, and you discover what you're really made of. She paused, looking out the window at the darkness beyond. But you also discover something else. You discover that the things we think are important, the things we chase and stress over, most of them don't actually matter at all. What does matter? Khalid asked. Maggie turned back to him. Connection, kindness, being seen and seeing others. The small moments of grace that remind you you're human and part of something larger than yourself. She smiled sadly. I had more of those moments in the shelter than I ever had working in mansions. Isn't that strange? Khalid felt something cracking inside him, some protective shell he'd built around his heart years ago. What will you do in New York? He asked, beyond finding work. Live, Maggie said simply. Really live. I spent 23 years taking care of someone else's home, someone else's family. I was so focused on being useful that I forgot to have my own life. No hobbies, no close friends, no adventures. Just work and sleep and work again. The shelter taught me I want more than that. I want to matter, but not just as a service to someone else. I want to matter to myself. That's brave, Khalid said. It's not brave. It's necessary, Maggie corrected gently. You reach a point where you either change or you die inside. I chose change. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their thoughts. The cabin lights had dimmed for the night flight, and most passengers were sleeping or watching movies on their personal screens. But Khalid and Maggie remained awake, connected by a conversation that felt increasingly important, though neither could quite articulate why. Can I ask you something? Maggie said eventually. And please feel free to tell me it's none of my business. Ask, Khalid said. What are you running from? The question landed like an arrow in his chest. What makes you think I'm running from something? Because people don't work 16 hours a day, 7 days a week unless they're trying to outrun something, or someone, usually themselves. Khalid stared at her, this woman who had known him for only a few hours, but somehow saw through him more clearly than people who'd known him for years. I'm running from failure, he said finally, from the possibility that I might not be enough. That all of this, everything I've built, might not actually mean anything. That when I die, people will remember the buildings and the deals, but not the man. And maybe there isn't much of a man left to remember. His voice cracked slightly on the last words, and he was shocked to feel emotion welling up in his throat. He never cried. He couldn't remember the last time he'd even come close. Maggie reached over and gently placed her hand on his. Her palm was rough from years of work, her fingers weathered, but the gesture was infinitely tender. The man I've been talking to for the past few hours is someone worth remembering, she said softly. He's thoughtful and honest and capable of questioning himself. He helped a stranger with her bag. He made conversation instead of disappearing into his work. He listened, really listened. That man is enough. More than enough. Khalid looked down at her hand on his. This simple human contact that felt like a lifeline. When had someone last touched him with genuine affection rather than calculation? How did you do it? He asked. How did you survive losing everything without losing yourself? Maggie was quiet for a long moment. I almost didn't, she admitted. There were dark days when getting out of bed felt impossible, days when I wondered if it was worth continuing. She took a breath. But then I'd remember my daughter. Khalid noticed this was the first time she'd mentioned a daughter. Where is she now? The pain that crossed Maggie's face was so profound that Khalid immediately regretted asking. She died, Maggie said quietly. 6 years ago. Car accident. She was 28, newly married, talking about starting a family. And then one drunk driver and she was gone. Maggie, I'm so sorry. After she died, I stopped living, Maggie continued, her voice steady despite the tears beginning to stream down her face. I just went through the motions. Work, sleep, work, sleep. I stopped calling friends, stopped doing anything that brought me joy. I was just existing, waiting to die so I could be with her again. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. And then I lost everything else. My job, my home, my dignity. I ended up in that shelter, sharing a room with 7 other women, wondering how my life had come to this. And one night, lying in that uncomfortable bed, listening to the city sounds outside, I heard my daughter's voice in my head as clearly as if she was sitting beside me. What did she say? Khalid asked gently. She said, Mom, I didn't die so you could stop living. I died, and that's horrible and unfair, and it breaks my heart that I had to leave you. But you're still here. You still get to see sunrises and taste chocolate, and laugh at silly jokes and help people and matter. Don't waste that. Don't make my death mean that 2 people died instead of 1. Maggie smiled through her tears. I don't know if it was really her or just my own mind trying to survive, but it changed everything. I decided that morning that I would honor her by actually living, by being present, by connecting with people, by finding purpose again, even if that purpose looked different than I'd imagined. Khalid found tears running down his own face now. He didn't try to hide them or wipe them away. They just fell, carrying with them years of suppressed grief and loneliness and fear. I had a brother, he said, the words coming from somewhere deep and buried. Rashid. He was 2 years younger than me. He died when I was 18. Leukemia. I'm sorry, Maggie said softly, maintaining her gentle hold on his hand. He was the good one, Khalid continued. The kind one. The one everyone loved. I was always too serious, too focused on success and status. Rashid just wanted to help people. He was going to be a doctor. He used to tell me that money and power were fine, but that real success was measured in lives improved, in suffering reduced, in joy created. Khalid's voice broke. When he died, I made a promise to myself. I would become so successful, so powerful, so wealthy, that I could never feel that helpless again, that I could protect everyone I loved from everything, that I could control outcomes through sheer force of will and resources. But you can't, Maggie said gently. You can't control death or loss or pain. No amount of money changes that. I know, Khalid whispered, but I've spent 20 years pretending I didn't know, building an empire as a shield against the fundamental powerlessness of being human. They sat together in the dim cabin, 2 strangers who had somehow become mirrors for each other's hidden truths. Around them, other passengers slept, unaware of the profound transformation happening in row 2. What are you going to do with your life? Maggie asked after a while. Really do, I mean. If you could strip away all the expectations and fears and just choose. Khalid thought about this question. Really thought about it. Perhaps for the first time in 20 years. I think I'd want to do what my brother wanted to do, he said slowly. Help people, but in my own way. I have resources that could change lives. I've spent years acquiring hotels and office buildings and investment portfolios. What if I used that same drive, that same energy to actually make a difference? To build something that mattered beyond profit margins? What's stopping you? Maggie asked. Fear, I suppose. Fear that it wouldn't be enough. Fear that I'd fail. Fear that I'm not actually capable of being the kind of person who could do something meaningful. You're already that person, Maggie said firmly. The person who sat beside me today, who listened to my story, who shared his own pain, who saw me as a human being instead of an inconvenience. That's the person who can change the world. Khalid looked at her, this remarkable woman who had lost everything but somehow retained the ability to see the best in a stranger. You've changed me, he said. This conversation, it's changed something fundamental in me. I can feel it. Good, Maggie said with a smile. Then we've both been changed today. That's what real connection does. It transforms us. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, announcing their descent into New York. The cabin lights brightened gradually, and passengers began to stir, gathering their belongings and preparing for landing. Khalid felt a sense of urgency. He didn't want this conversation to end. He didn't want to lose this connection that felt more real than anything he'd experienced in years. "Maggie," he said, "can I help you? With finding work? With getting settled in New York? I have connections, resources." But Maggie was shaking her head gently. "That's kind of you. But no, I need to do this myself. I need to know I can stand on my own feet, build my own life. Accepting help from my sister, that's different. That's family. But I can't jump from being rescued by Mrs. Hendrix's daughter to being rescued by a kind stranger on a plane. I need to rescue myself." Khalid understood, though it frustrated him. "Then at least give me your contact information. Let me know how you're doing, please." Maggie considered this, then nodded. She pulled a small piece of paper from her purse and wrote down her sister's phone number. "You can reach me here. And I'd like that. I'd like to know how your transformation goes." "My transformation?" Khalid asked. "The one that started today," Maggie said. "The one where you decide to stop running and start living. Where you honor your brother by becoming the person he believed you could be." The plane touched down smoothly at JFK. As they taxied to the gate, Khalid made a decision. "I'm going to start a foundation," he said suddenly. "A real one. Not just a tax shelter. I'm going to focus on housing and employment for people in transition, people like you, who just need a chance, not charity, but an opportunity to rebuild." Maggie's eyes filled with tears again, but these were tears of joy. "That's beautiful. Your brother would be proud. Will you help me?" Khalid asked. "Not as an employee, but as a consultant. You understand this issue from the inside. You could help make sure we actually help people instead of just feeling good about ourselves." Maggie laughed. A genuine, full laugh. "Now that I'll accept, because that's not rescue. That's partnership. That's using what I've learned to make a difference. Yes, I'll help you." The plane came to a stop at the gate. Around them, passengers were standing, retrieving bags, eager to disembark and get on with their lives. But Khalid and Maggie sat for a moment longer. "Thank you," Khalid said, "for seeing me, for sharing your story, for changing my life." "Thank you," Maggie replied, "for the same reasons, and for reminding me that connection can happen anywhere, even in the most unexpected places." They stood together, gathering their belongings. As they walked toward the exit, Khalid's phone buzzed with dozens of missed messages and emails. His old life was waiting, demanding his attention, but something had fundamentally shifted. The messages that had seemed urgent a few hours ago now felt less important. In the jetway, they paused. "This isn't goodbye," Khalid said. "I'll call you next week. We'll start planning the foundation." "I'll look forward to it," Maggie said. They hugged, a brief but genuine embrace, then went their separate ways. Maggie toward baggage claim, and her sister who was waiting. Khalid toward where Marcus was undoubtedly waiting with a car and a briefcase full of urgent matters. But as Khalid walked through the terminal, he felt lighter than he had in years. A stranger on a plane had seen through his armor, had shared her story, had offered him a mirror to see himself clearly for the first time in decades. 3 weeks later, Khalid sat in a coffee shop in Brooklyn, across the table from Maggie. She looked different, healthier, with color in her cheeks and light in her eyes. She'd started working at her sister's hospital and was loving the regular hours and the sense of community. Between them on the table were plans for the Al-Rashid Foundation for Housing and Employment. Not just plans, but real, actionable strategies for how to create pathways out of homelessness that preserved dignity and empowered people to rebuild their lives. "I've been thinking," Khalid said, "about that question you asked me on the plane, about what I was running from." "And?" Maggie prompted. "I realize now I wasn't just running from failure. I was running from grief, from the loss of my brother, from the guilt of surviving when he didn't, from the fear of truly living because living means risking loss again." "And now?" Maggie asked. "Now I'm going to stop running," Khalid said. "I'm going to live, really live, like you said, and I'm going to honor Rashid by doing the work he would have done in my own way." Maggie reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "He'd be proud of you. I'm proud of you." Over the next year, the Al-Rashid Foundation became one of the most innovative and effective organizations working on homelessness in America. But it wasn't the scale or the success that mattered most to Khalid. It was the individual stories. The woman who got her first apartment after 3 years on the streets, the man who found employment after countless rejections, the families who were reunited, the dignity that was restored. Khalid had learned something on that flight from Los Angeles to New York, something that a homeless woman in a first-class seat had taught him through her grace and her honesty, and her willingness to be vulnerable with a stranger. He'd learned that the meaning of life isn't found in boardrooms or bank accounts or business empires. It's found in connection, in being seen and seeing others, in transforming pain into purpose, in honoring those we've lost by truly living. And he'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing one human can do for another is simply to listen, to see them, to acknowledge their humanity and their worth. Maggie had said that rock bottom shows you what really matters, but Khalid had discovered something else. Sometimes it takes a stranger on a plane to show you that you've been at your own rock bottom all along, surrounded by luxury, but starving for something money can't buy. The foundation grew. Maggie became not just a consultant, but a friend, one of Khalid's closest and most trusted advisors. She never let him forget where he'd come from, or more importantly, where she'd come from. She kept him grounded, kept him focused on the people, not just the programs. And Khalid, for the first time in 20 years, felt like he was living a life his brother would recognize, a life of purpose and meaning and genuine connection, a life worth living. It had all started with a simple act of kindness, a conversation between strangers, a moment of vulnerability that had cracked open two hearts and let the light in. Sometimes that's all it takes. Sometimes the entire trajectory of a life can change in a single conversation, if we're brave enough to be honest, vulnerable, and truly present with another human being. The billionaire and the homeless woman had both been invisible in their own ways, both trapped by circumstances and choices and grief. But on that flight, they'd seen each other, really seen each other, and in that seeing, they'd both found a way back to themselves. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift two strangers could give each other. Not money or opportunity or solutions, but recognition, the simple, powerful acknowledgement that says, I see you, you matter, your story is important, you are not invisible. That was what changed Khalid forever. Not Maggie's poverty or her struggle, but her humanity, her willingness to share her truth, to listen to his, to hold space for transformation without trying to force it. In a world that moves fast, that values efficiency and productivity and surface connections, they'd found something rare, genuine understanding between two human souls, and in finding it, they'd both been transformed. The Arab billionaire and the poor woman, sitting side by side on a flight, discovering that the distance between them was far smaller than the world would suggest, discovering that beneath the labels and circumstances and vastly different lives, they were both just humans, seeking connection, seeking purpose, seeking a way to make their lives matter. That seeking had brought them together, and in coming together, they'd found what they'd been looking for all along, not in some distant future or some perfect circumstance, but right there, in row 2, seat A and seat B, 30,000 feet above the ground, between where they'd been and where they were going. Sometimes the journey that matters most isn't the one from one city to another. It's the journey from isolation to connection, from surviving to living, from running to standing still and facing yourself honestly. That was the journey Khalid and Maggie began on that flight. And it was a journey that would continue for the rest of their lives, not because they needed each other, but because they'd given each other something precious, permission to be fully human, fully vulnerable, fully alive. And in the end, isn't that what we're all searching for? Someone who sees us, someone who reminds us that we matter, someone who helps us find our way back to ourselves. Khalid found that in Maggie, and Maggie found it in Khalid. Two strangers on a plane who changed each other forever, simply by being brave enough to have a real conversation, in a world that rarely makes space for them anymore. That was their gift to each other, and through the foundation, it became their gift to thousands of others, creating spaces where people could be seen, could be valued, could be given the chance to transform their own lives. All because one man decided to close his laptop and talk to the woman beside him. All because one woman decided to share her truth instead of hiding it. All because two people chose connection over isolation, vulnerability over protection, presence over distraction. That's how lives change, not through grand gestures or dramatic interventions, but through small moments of genuine human connection, through conversations that crack us open, through strangers who become mirrors, reflecting back to us who we really are and who we might become. The Arab billionaire sat beside a poor woman on a flight, and what she said changed him forever. But the truth is, they changed each other, and through that change, they went on to change countless other lives. Because that's what transformation does. It doesn't stop with us. It ripples outward, touching everyone we encounter, creating waves of change that extend far beyond that first moment of connection. And it all started with 2 seats on a plane, 2 people brave enough to be honest, and the simple recognition that despite everything that separated them, They were both human, both worthy, both searching for something more than the lives they'd been living. They found it in each other, and in finding it, they learned the most important lesson of all. We are not meant to journey alone. We are meant to see each other, to connect with each other, to transform each other through the simple gift of our presence and our truth. That was what Maggie gave Khalid on that flight. That was what Khalid gave Maggie. And that was what they both gave to the world through the work that followed. A reminder that every person matters, every story is important, every life has value. And sometimes, all it takes to change everything is one honest conversation with a stranger who becomes something more, a catalyst, a mirror, a teacher, a friend. That's what they became to each other, and that's what their story became for everyone who heard it. A reminder that transformation is always possible, that connection is always available, and that sometimes the most unlikely encounters hold the greatest gifts, the billionaire and the poor woman, the powerful and the powerless. Or at least, that's how it appeared from the outside. But from the inside, from the truth of their conversation and their connection, they were just two humans, equally wounded, equally searching, equally in need of being seen. And in seeing each other, they found themselves. That's how the story ends. But it's also how the story begins. Because every ending is a beginning. Every transformation is an invitation to transform again. Every connection is a reminder that we are all connected, all part of the same human family, all worthy of love, dignity, and the chance to live a life that matters. 5 years after that fateful flight, Khalid stood on a stage in Manhattan, addressing a crowd of philanthropists, city officials, and formerly homeless individuals who had rebuilt their lives through the Al-Rashid Foundation. The event was celebrating the opening of their 50th transitional housing facility, this one specifically designed for women over 40 who had lost their jobs and homes. As Khalid spoke about the mission and the impact, his eyes found Maggie in the front row. She was dressed beautifully, her confidence radiating in a way it hadn't that day on the plane. She'd become the Foundation's Director of Lived Experience, ensuring that every program was designed with input from those who had actually experienced homelessness. But what most people in that audience didn't know was the secret that Khalid and Maggie had been carefully guarding for 5 years, a secret that would have changed everything about how people viewed their story. After the speeches, after the applause and the photographs and the congratulations, Khalid and Maggie found a quiet corner in the venue's garden. The evening air was cool, and the city lights twinkled around them. "Are you ready?" Maggie asked softly. Khalid nodded. "It's time. We can't keep hiding the truth forever." 3 days later, Khalid called a press conference. The room was packed with journalists, all expecting another announcement about the Foundation's expansion. But what Khalid revealed instead sent shockwaves through the media. "5 years ago, I met a woman on a plane who changed my life," Khalid began. "I've told that story many times, how a homeless woman's wisdom and grace inspired me to start this foundation. It's a story about compassion and transformation and the power of human connection." He paused, his hands gripping the podium. "But I haven't told you the whole truth, and the whole truth is the most important part of this story." Maggie joined him at the podium, her presence steady and calm. "The truth is," Khalid continued, "Margaret Walsh was never homeless." The room erupted in whispers and confused murmurs. Cameras flashed frantically. Maggie took the microphone. "5 years ago, I was a successful investigative journalist, working on a series about how wealthy individuals treat service workers and people in poverty. I had documented countless instances of cruelty, dismissiveness, and dehumanization. I was cynical. I believed that the ultra-wealthy were incapable of genuine empathy." She glanced at Khalid, who nodded encouragingly. "I bought that first-class ticket myself. I dressed as a poor woman and sat next to Khalid Al-Rashid, intending to document how he would treat someone he perceived as beneath his social class. I had a hidden recording device. I was planning an expose that would destroy his reputation and prove my thesis about wealth and empathy." The room was completely silent now, every person hanging on her words. "But something unexpected happened," Maggie continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Khalid didn't treat me with contempt or dismissal. He treated me with kindness, respect, and genuine interest. He listened to the story I'd fabricated about being homeless, and he responded with compassion and vulnerability. He shared his own pain, his own fears. He saw me as a human being." Khalid took over. "When the flight ended, Maggie disappeared. I tried to call the number she'd given me, but it wasn't real. I was devastated. That conversation had meant everything to me, and suddenly the person I'd connected with was gone. I couldn't write the article," Maggie said. I couldn't expose someone who had been so genuinely kind, so authentically vulnerable. Instead, I started investigating Khalid's life and business practices, looking for the cruelty I was sure must exist somewhere, but I didn't find it. What I found was a man who was lonely, driven, and searching for meaning. 3 weeks after the flight, Maggie showed up at my office, Khalid said. She told me the truth about who she really was and what she'd planned to do. I was angry at first, betrayed. But then she told me something that changed everything. Maggie smiled through tears. I told him that his kindness had restored my faith in humanity. That in trying to expose the cruelty of the wealthy, I'd discovered something far more important, that compassion isn't determined by bank accounts. It's determined by choices. And Khalid had chosen compassion when he had no reason to, when he thought no one was watching, when there was nothing to gain from it. We spent hours talking that day, Khalid continued, really talking, this time without any pretense or hidden agendas. And we realized that we'd both been changed by that flight, both been transformed by that conversation. Maggie had set out to prove that wealthy people lacked empathy. Instead, she'd discovered her own cynicism and how it had closed her heart. And Khalid had set out on a business trip, Maggie added, and instead found a mirror that showed him he'd been living a half-life, that he'd been running from grief and fear instead of toward purpose and meaning. Khalid took a deep breath. We decided that day to start this foundation together, but we also decided to keep the true story private. We thought the narrative of the billionaire and the homeless woman would be more powerful, more compelling. We thought it would inspire more donations and support. We were wrong, Maggie said firmly. The real story is more powerful. Because the real story isn't about a wealthy man rescuing a poor woman. It's about two people choosing to see each other's humanity, despite their differences. It's about being kind when you think no one's watching. It's about transformation being available to everyone, regardless of their circumstances. The real story, Khalid said, is that compassion doesn't require poverty to exist. You don't need to meet someone who's homeless to practice empathy and kindness. You can choose those things in every interaction, with every person you meet. The checkout clerk, the parking attendant, the waiter, the janitor. Every single person deserves to be seen and valued. Maggie nodded. We're revealing the truth now because we realize that the fake story, while inspiring, sends the wrong message. It suggests that only extreme poverty deserves our compassion, that only dramatic circumstances merit our attention. But the truth is, everyone is fighting battles we can't see. Everyone deserves kindness. And because, Khalid added, we're getting married next month, and we wanted to start our life together with complete honesty. The room erupted again, this time with a different energy. Questions flew from every direction. How did an investigative ploy turn into a romantic relationship? Were all the conversations you've shared about the foundation based on lies? How can donors trust you now? Maggie raised her hand, quieting the crowd. The conversations about the foundation were real. The work we've done is real. The people we've helped are real. What wasn't real was my initial identity. But everything that happened after that flight, every decision we've made, every program we've created, has been authentic and driven by a genuine desire to make a difference. And as for how a ploy became a romance, Khalid said, taking Maggie's hand, that's simple. When two people see each other clearly, when they choose vulnerability over protection, when they recognize each other's fundamental humanity, connection happens. Sometimes that connection becomes friendship. For us, it became something more. In the days following the press conference, the response was mixed. Some donors felt betrayed and withdrew their support. Others were moved by the honesty and increased their contributions. The media debated the ethics of Maggie's original deception and whether it invalidated the foundation's work. But something unexpected happened. The story of Khalid's kindness to someone he believed was homeless when he had nothing to gain from it resonated even more deeply than the original narrative. It became a viral moment, shared millions of times with the caption, "This is who he was when he thought no one was watching." Businesses started training their employees on the Al-Rashid standard of treating every person with dignity, regardless of their perceived status. Schools used the story to teach about empathy and the importance of character over reputation, and the foundation thrived, now with a new mission statement. Everyone deserves to be seen. Every interaction is an opportunity for compassion. Every person matters. On their wedding day, Khalid and Maggie stood before their closest friends and family. The ceremony was small and intimate, reflecting their journey from strangers to partners to life companions. In his vows, Khalid said, "You taught me that who we are when no one's watching is who we really are. You taught me that kindness isn't performative, it's essential. You taught me that love, real love, is built on seeing and being seen. I promise to spend the rest of my life seeing you, celebrating you, and choosing compassion in every moment, whether anyone's watching or not. Maggie's vows were equally profound. You proved to me that cynicism is a prison we build for ourselves, that expecting the worst from people often blinds us to their best. You showed me that vulnerability is strength, that admitting our fears and failures is the first step toward transformation. I promise to spend the rest of my life being honest with you, challenging you, supporting you, and reminding you that the man you are when no one's watching is exactly the man I fell in love with. Years later, when asked about the controversy surrounding their story, Maggie would say, "The truth is always more complicated than the narrative, but it's also always more powerful. We could have kept living the lie, protecting our reputation and the foundation's image, but real transformation requires honesty, and we wanted our work to be built on truth, not convenient fiction." Khalid would add, "That flight changed my life, but not for the reasons people originally thought. It wasn't that a homeless woman taught me compassion. It was that I discovered I was capable of compassion when I thought no one was watching, when there was no benefit to me, when it was just the right thing to do. That discovery saved my life. It showed me who I could be if I chose to be." The Al-Rashid Foundation continued to grow, but its focus evolved. Yes, it still provided housing and employment support for those in need, but it also created programs teaching empathy, training businesses on dignified service, and promoting the radical idea that every human interaction is an opportunity to see and honor another person's humanity. They never forgot the lesson of that flight. Not the fabricated story, but the real truth beneath it. That who we are in small moments defines who we are in life. That kindness doesn't require an audience. That compassion is a choice we make again and again, in every interaction, with every person we meet. And that sometimes the most transformative relationships begin with seeing past the surface, past the labels and assumptions, to the human being underneath, the billionaire and the journalist, the powerful man and the woman determined to expose him. Two people who could have remained adversaries, divided by cynicism and defensiveness. Instead, they chose curiosity, they chose vulnerability, they chose to see each other. And in that seeing, they found not just love, but purpose, not just partnership, but meaning, not just a foundation that helped thousands, but a living example of what becomes possible when we treat every person as worthy of our attention, our respect, our compassion. That was the real story, not perfect, not simple, but true. And in the end, the truth was more powerful than any narrative they could have crafted, because the truth is always an invitation to be better, to choose kindness, to see the humanity in everyone we meet. That was what Khalid and Maggie learned on that flight, and what they spent the rest of their lives teaching. We are all connected. We are all worthy. We all deserve to be seen. And when we choose to see each other, when we choose compassion over judgment, connection over isolation, honesty over comfortable fiction, we create the possibility for transformation. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone whose life we touch. That's the power of a single conversation between strangers. That's the gift of choosing kindness when no one's watching. That's the miracle of being seen and seeing others in return. The Arab billionaire sat beside a woman on a flight. He thought she was homeless. She was actually a journalist, trying to expose him. What she said didn't change him. What changed him was who he chose to be in that moment, when he believed no one would ever know. And that choice, that moment of genuine compassion, changed everything. Not because it was witnessed, not because it would be rewarded, but because it was real. And real is what transforms us. Real is what matters. Real is what lasts. That was the lesson. That was the gift. That was the truth that changed 2 lives and touched thousands more. Be who you are when no one's watching. Choose kindness without expectation. See the humanity in everyone you meet. That's how lives change. That's how love begins. That's how we transform the world, one honest interaction at a time.